Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening a file that, honestly, if I pitched this to a Hollywood studio, they would probably tell me it's too dark.
Oh, absolutely. It's too much.
It reads less like a Sunday school lesson and more like a very gritty, very expensive HBO war drama. We are looking at 2 Kings chapter 3.
It is, without a doubt, one of the most intense, complex, and frankly disturbing narratives in the entire Old Testament. It's got everything.
Everything you could want?
You have high-stakes political intrigue, you've got a massive economic crisis driving the whole thing, a desperate desert march.
A very snarky prophet.
A very snarky prophet, and an ending that involves a human sacrifice on a city wall that actually works in a terrifying way.
Yeah, that ending, I was reading through the source material you sent over, and I actually had to stop and reread verse 27 3 or 4 times. I was like, wait, did that just happen?
Did I read that right? Yeah.
And did the bad guy just win?
Yeah.
So we're definitely going to have to spend some real time unpacking that because it is just shocking.
It is shocking. And it's meant to be. But the goal for this deep dive isn't just to tell a crazy story. We want to really analyze the mechanics of what is happening here politically, psychologically, and spiritually.
Right.
We have a stack of sources, commentaries, historical context on the divided kingdom around 850 BC, some deep theological essays, and even some, archaeological notes on the Moabite stone, which directly mentions this conflict.
Right. And our mission here is to move way beyond the surface level. We want to understand the leadership psychology under pressure. That's a huge theme.
It is.
We want to understand the mechanics of the miracle, this famous concept of digging ditches. And we absolutely need to look at the dark spiritual warfare that is happening just behind the scenes.
Exactly. And for anyone listening who feels like they are currently in a dry season, just waiting for a break, maybe in your career, maybe in your personal life, this story has a central metaphor that is incredibly relevant.
That's the one.
The idea of digging ditches in a dry valley. I mean, how do you prepare for a miracle when there is absolutely zero sign of rain?
It's a profound question. So let's set the stage. We are in the era of the divided kingdom. This is roughly 850 BC. The glory days of Solomon are long gone.
A distant memory.
The kingdom is split in 2. You have Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Who are the players on the board here? Let's start with the guy who kicks this whole thing off.
Okay, so you have a triumvirate of kings, really. It plays out like a geopolitical thriller. First, you have Jehoram, the king of Israel. Now, context is absolutely key here. Jehoram is the son of the infamous Ahab and Jezebel.
Okay, stop right there. Ahab and Jezebel. I mean, those are the ultimate biblical villains. Nobody names their kid Jezebel today for a very good reason.
Right. They are the archetype of evil. But Jehoram is interesting because the text describes him as evil, but with a nuance. It says he was evil, but not as evil as his parents. He's sort of diet evil or evil light.
Diet evil. I like that. So what does that mean in practice?
Well, Verse 2 explicitly tells us he put away the pillar of Baal that his father had made. So on the surface, that looks good. He is not a full-blown Baal worshiper like his dad was.
So is he a reformer then? Is he trying to get the nation back to God?
Not quite. He's a pragmatist. This is a political calculation. He removes the specific pillar to Baal, which was a foreign god, likely to appease the religious conservatives in his kingdom, or maybe just to distinguish his reign from his very unpopular mother.
But he doesn't go all the way.
No. Verse 3 says, he cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam. And that phrase is so important.
Okay, let's unpack that, because that phrase, the sins of Jeroboam, comes up constantly in the books of Kings. It sounds like religious jargon, but what does it actually mean politically and economically?
Think of it like a business franchise war. When the kingdom divided generations earlier, the northern kings, starting with Jeroboam, had a massive problem. The temple of God, the center of worship, was in Jerusalem.
And Jerusalem was in the south, in Judah, the enemy's territory.
Exactly. So if you are the king of the north, you don't want your citizens traveling south for the major religious festival.
Of course not. They're spending money there. They're developing loyalties there.
Right. If they go to Jerusalem to worship, they might get nostalgic. They might think, hey, maybe this whole divided kingdom thing was a mistake. They might defect back to the house of David. It was a national security risk.
So what did Jeroboam do?
He invented a state-sponsored alternative religion, a counterfeit. He set up 2 new worship centers, one in Bethel and one in Dan, and put golden calves there. He told the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods.
It's convenience religion.
Yeah.
Why drive 3 hours to the official temple when you can just go to the local golden calf franchise right down the street?
Precisely. It was a political maneuver disguised as religion, meant to consolidate his power and create a distinct national identity for the north. And Jehoram keeps this system. He removes the bull statue because that was foreign and unpopular, but he keeps the golden calves because that system keeps him in power.
So that tells us everything we need to know about his character. He uses religion as a tool for control. He's religious when it's convenient, but he's not converted.
He's a politician through and through. Okay, so that's Jehoram. Then we have the king of the south, Jehoshaphat.
And Jehoshaphat is the complete opposite of Jehoram.
He's the total foil. He is the righteous king of Judah. He genuinely loves God. He's a descendant of David. But, and this is a huge but, he has a fatal flaw, a character defect that keeps getting him into trouble over and over again.
Which is what?
He has a desperate need to be liked. He has a weakness for bad alliances. The Bible calls it being unequally yoked.
And we've seen this before with him, haven't we?
Oh, yeah. If you remember 1 Kings 22, he almost got himself killed allying with Jehoram's own father, Ahab. He sat there while the false prophets lied. He went into battle in disguise while Ahab dressed as a common soldier, and he barely escaped with his life. You would think he learned his lesson.
But clearly not, because here he is answering the phone when Ahab's son calls.
Exactly. Jehoram calls him up and says, "Hey, Moab is rebelling. Will you go to war with me?" And Jehoshaphat responds with this famous, or maybe infamous, line in verse 7. "I am as thou art, my people as thy people, my horses as thy horses."
Wait, pause on that. I am as thou art. That is objectively false. Jehoshaphat serves Yahweh. Jehoram serves a golden calf and is the son of Jezebel. They are nothing alike. Why is he blurring the lines like that?
It's a complete lack of boundaries.
Yeah.
Jehoshaphat is that guy who just can't say no. He prioritizes this idea of unity and being a good neighbor over spiritual integrity. He's a people pleaser on a national scale.
So he's willing to compromise his values to avoid conflict.
Completely. He essentially hands over his military sovereignty, the lives of his soldiers, to a guy who stands for everything he supposedly opposes. It's a disastrous decision rooted in his own insecurity.
It's dangerous. He's putting his people at risk because he wants to be one of the cool kids.
You've nailed it. And then there's the third wheel in this road trip, the king of Edom.
Right, he doesn't even get a name.
He's a non-entity in the story. He's essentially a vassal. At this time, Edom was under Judah's control, so he's a deputy king. He has to do whatever Jehoshaphat tells him. He represents the secular or worldly force that just gets dragged along by the decisions of believers. He has no real agency here. He's just cannon fodder for their plans.
So we have our coalition, a pragmatist, a people pleaser, and a puppet. That is not a recipe for success.
It's a mess waiting to happen.
Okay, so that's our team. Now let's look at the other side of the field. Why are they going to war? Who is the antagonist?
Enter Mesha, the king of Moab. Now, Moab has been a vassal state to Israel for a while. They've been paying tribute. But the text gives us a fascinating detail about Mesha in verse 4. It calls him a sheep master.
A sheep master. That sounds kind of nice, almost pastoral, like he's out there with a cook petting lambs.
It sounds quaint until you look at the numbers. The source text tells us he was paying an annual tribute of 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams.
Oh, hold on. Say that again. 100,000?
100,000 lambs and the wool from another 100,000 rams every single year.
Let's do some quick math here just to visualize this. In modern terms, a lamb is worth what? Maybe $150, $200. A fleece from a ram is also valuable.
Easily. If you calculate the market value of 200,000 animals plus the wool rights, we are talking about tens of millions of dollars in modern currency. This is a massive segment of Israel's GDP. This is like a major oil-producing nation suddenly going offline for the global economy.
So this isn't just about pride. This isn't Mesha saying, I don't want to bow to you anymore. This is an economic collapse for Israel if they lose this revenue stream.
It's an economic war, absolutely. When Ahab died, Mesha saw a power vacuum. He looked at Jehoram and thought, this kid is weak, the dynasty is unstable, I'm canceling the subscription. He rebelled. So Jehoram isn't just fighting for glory, he's fighting for his economy. He's broke without those sheep.
Okay, so the motivation is money and control. It's a trade war that turns into a shooting war. Jehoram calls up Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat says, I'm in, and they drag Edom along for the ride.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk strategy. They decide not to attack from the north, crossing the Jordan near Jericho, which would be the direct, obvious route. They decide to go around through the wilderness of Edom. Why?
It's a surprise attack, a flanking maneuver. The northern border of Moab was heavily fortified along the Arnon River Canyon. It would be a slaughter to try a direct assault.
So they get clever.
They think they're being clever. They think, let's march south through Judah, pick up the Edomite army, circle around the bottom of the Dead Sea, and stab them in the back from the undefended south.
It sounds smart on paper.
It's a very clever military move, but it carries a huge logistical risk. They are marching a massive army, 3 kingdoms worth of men, probably 30,000 to 40,000 soldiers, plus thousands of horses and baggage animals, through a desert badland.
This isn't a stroll through the park.
No. The wilderness of Edom is not a scenic hike, it's a wasteland. It's arid, it's rocky, it's brutal. And their entire plan hinges on finding enough water along the way.
And that arrogance thinking they can outsmart the terrain brings us right into the crisis, because the clever strategy falls apart almost immediately.
It takes 7 days. Verse 9 tells us they fetched a compass, meaning they took a circuitous route of 7 days' journey, and they run out of water.
I want to pause and just try to feel that for a second. 7 days into a march through the desert. You are wearing armor, carrying weapons. It's probably over 100 degrees during the day. You have thousands of animals with you, and the canteens are dry.
We aren't talking about being thirsty. We are talking about systemic biological shutdown. Your tongue swells, you can't think straight, your organs start to fail.
It is a nightmare scenario. The horses are likely starting to drop. The discipline of the ranks is breaking down. Soldiers are looking at their commanders with murder in their eyes. This isn't just uncomfortable, this is a death sentence. An army without water ceases to be an army within 48 hours. It becomes a mob of dying men.
And this is before they've even seen a single Moabite soldier. Their brilliant plan has led them to die of thirst.
It is a total logistical failure. And this is where we see the tale of 2 reactions. This is such a fascinating psychological study of leadership under extreme pressure. Look at how Jehoram reacts versus how Jehoshaphat reacts.
Jehoram, the guy who started this whole thing, immediately collapses into despair and blame. Verse 10, he cries out, "Alas, for the Lord has called these 3 kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab."
The Lord has called us. That's interesting. He blames God.
It's fascinating, isn't it? He hasn't consulted God this whole time. He hasn't prayed. He didn't ask a prophet before he started this campaign. He planned this whole thing himself with his buddies. But the moment it goes wrong, who does he blame?
God.
He projects all of his guilt and failure onto God. Why is God doing this to me? It's a classic sign of his character. He takes credit for the plan, but assigns blame for the failure.
It's the ultimate victim mentality. I drove the car into the ditch, but God must have put the ditch there to trap me.
Exactly. He views God as this hostile, capricious entity that is just out to get him. He assumes God's intentions are malicious. He brought us here specifically to kill us.
And then look at Jehoshaphat. He's in the same desert.
Yeah.
His throat is just as dry. His army is dying too. But his reaction is completely different.
Completely. Jehoshaphat doesn't panic. He doesn't blame. He pauses. And he asks the single most important question in the entire chapter, verse 11. But Jehoshaphat said, "Is there not here a prophet of the Lord that we may inquire of the Lord by him?"
He looks for a spiritual solution to a physical crisis.
That is the key difference. Jehoram sees a dead end. Jehoshaphat sees a lack of information. Jehoram says, "We're doomed." Jehoshaphat says, "We made a mistake. We didn't consult headquarters." He shifts from "we are going to die" to "we need to talk to management."
It shows that even in his compromised state, his first instinct is still to turn to God.
His spiritual muscle memory kicks in, yes. And it turns out there is a prophet nearby. Which, is a bit of a coincidence, isn't it? What is Elisha, the premier prophet of Israel, doing in the middle of a war zone in the desert?
God put him there.
God positioned him there, absolutely. A servant speaks up, one of Jehoram's servants, interestingly enough, not one of Jehoshaphat's, and says, "Here is Elisha, the son of Shaphat." And the servant gives Elisha a very specific resume reference. He says, "This is Elisha, which poured water on the hands of Elijah."
That's such a weird detail. Poured water on the hands. It's not he who called down fire or he who parted the Jordan. It's this humble, servant-like description.
It's an idiom for an apprentice or a personal assistant. It establishes his credentials in the most profound way. He was Elijah's disciple. He was the one doing the menial tasks, washing the master's hands before meals, carrying his cloak.
So it's about his relationship, not his resume.
It's a reminder that in God's kingdom, authority is rooted in service. He didn't just graduate from prophet school with a certificate. He served the man of God. He was faithful in the small things, and that's why he now carries the mantle.
So 3 kings, royalty, wearing their crowns and armor, have to humble themselves and go down to the prophet's tent. That's a total reversal of protocol, isn't it? Usually the prophet gets summoned to the palace.
It is a complete reversal. Desperation humbles you in a hurry. They go down to Elisha, and let me tell you, Elisha is not happy to see them. This is not a warm pastoral visit.
No, reading verse 13, he is incredibly salty. He basically tells Jehoram to get lost.
He's hostile. He looks at Jehoram, the king of his own nation, and says, "What have I to do with thee? Get thee to the prophets of thy father and to the prophets of thy mother."
Wow, that's go ask your mom and dad's fake prophets for help.
Essentially, yes, he's mocking him. He's saying, you kept the golden calves. Your parents worshipped Baal. You have plenty of false prophets on your state payroll. Why are you coming to Yahweh now that you're in trouble? Go ask the idols you've been serving to make it rain.
That is incredibly bold. He is speaking truth to power in a way that could easily get him killed. Jehoram is a king with a sword. Elisha is an old man in a tent.
But Elisha knows who really holds the power in that conversation. Jehoram pleads with him. He gets desperate, basically saying, don't be like that. The Lord brought us here. We are all going to die. Yeah. And then Elisha drops a theological bombshell.
This is verse 14.
He looks at Jehoram and says, "As the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, surely were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, I would not look toward thee nor see thee."
Ouch. So he's saying, the only reason I'm even talking to you right now is because your righteous friend is here. Otherwise, you'd be invisible to me.
Exactly. This is the salt and light principle in action. God's grace is often extended to the wicked simply because of their association with the righteous. Jehoram and the king of Edom are about to get a miracle they do not deserve. They deserve to die in that desert for their stupidity and their idolatry.
But because Jehoshaphat, flawed, compromised Jehoshaphat, is standing in the room, God spares the whole group.
Yes, God honors the presence of his own.
That is a heavy thought for our listeners. You might be the reason your workplace is still afloat. You might be the reason your family hasn't totally fallen apart. Just your presence, your covenant with God, invites a spillover of favor onto people who don't even know him.
Absolutely. You are the preservative in the room. Now, Elisha is agitated. He's angry at Jehoram's hypocrisy. He's clearly riled up, and he knows something about the prophetic gift. He can't prophesy effectively in this state of mind. Anger and agitation block the signal. So what does he do?
He calls for a musician. Verse 15. But now bring me a minstrel.
He does. He needs to shift the atmosphere.
Yeah.
We often think of prophecy as just God taking over a person like a robot, but Elisha shows us that our own spirit has to be prepared to hear God's voice. He needed to calm down. He needed to tune out the politics and the king's whining.
And the music works.
It does. It says, "And it came to pass, when the minstrel played, that the hand of the Lord came upon him. The music settled his spirit, it cleared the anger, and it created a receptive environment for the word of God."
That's a practical tool right there. If you're stressed, if you're anxious, if you're angry, put on some worship music. Change the atmosphere in your own heart first.
It's spiritual warfare for your own soul. And when the music plays, the word comes.
Yeah.
And it is a strange word. It is not what they were expecting. Verse 16, "And he said, Thus saith the Lord, make this valley full of ditches."
This is the core metaphor of the entire chapter, the theology of ditches.
It is. Elisha gives them a promise first. "For thus saith the Lord, ye shall not see wind, neither shall ye see rain." So no storm clouds, no thunder, no big dramatic hurricane, yet that valley shall be filled with water.
So the miracle is coming, but it won't look like they expect. But there's a condition. They have to dig the ditches first.
Right. And I want you to really think about how physically difficult and psychologically absurd that command is.
You're dehydrated. You haven't had water in days. Your strength is gone. The ground in the wilderness of Edom is like concrete. It's baked clay and rock. And a prophet tells you to grab a shovel and start digging holes in the ground because invisible water is coming from an invisible source.
It makes no sense physically. Every instinct in your body says, conserve your energy, lie down in the shade, don't exert yourself. But spiritual logic is often the opposite of natural logic.
Faith is action. If they hadn't dug the ditches, what would have happened when the water came?
The flash flood would have come down the wadi, rushed over the hard, flat ground, and kept right on going into the Dead Sea. It wouldn't have pooled, they couldn't have captured it, they would have watched their salvation flow by and still died of thirst.
So, no ditches equals no water retained. That's the takeaway.
It is. The size of your blessing is often determined by the size of your preparation. Are you digging a ditch the size of a teacup, or are you digging a trench the size of a canal? How much do you actually want God to do? How much are you preparing for?
I love that. And Elisha doesn't stop with the water. As if that wasn't enough, he says, and this is but a light thing in the sight of the Lord.
I love that phrase so much, a light thing. To the kings, the lack of water was a life or death Category 5 crisis. To God, it was easy. It was trivial. Elisha is telling them, God wants to do more than just help you survive. He wants to give you total victory.
And he predicts the total defeat of Moab.
Yes. He says God will deliver the Moabites into their hand.
But I have to push back on the specific instructions for the victory here. This is verse 19. He tells them to smite every fenced city and every choice city, and shall fell every good tree and stop all wells of water and mar every good piece of land with stones.
It is a scorched earth policy. Total war. Complete devastation.
But wait a minute, isn't that illegal according to their own law? I remember reading in Deuteronomy 20, the Torah specifically forbids cutting down fruit trees during a siege. It says something like, are the trees of the field men that you should besiege them? It's like an ancient environmental protection law for warfare.
You are spot on. This creates a massive theological tension. Why does God's prophet command them to do something that seems to directly contradict God's written law?
Exactly. Is Elisha going rogue? Is he just caught up in the moment?
The consensus among most scholars is that the Deuteronomy law applies to wars of conquest, when you are taking over a land that you intend to inhabit. You don't destroy the infrastructure and the fruit trees because you're going to need them to eat from next year.
But this isn't a war of conquest.
No. They aren't trying to annex Moab. This is a punitive expedition. This is a divine judgment. So it seems to be a specific, one-time command for the total devastation of a rebellious and idolatrous nation. It's harsh, but it underscores that this isn't just a political skirmish in God's eyes, it's a judgment event.
Okay, so the prophecy is set. Dig ditches, you'll get water, and then you'll destroy Moab. Let's move to the next morning. The soldiers presumably spend the night digging, probably grumbling and confused the whole time.
Verse 20 gives us the timing. It says the water arrived in the morning when the meat offering was offered. That's a crucial detail we shouldn't just skip over.
The meat offering, that's not a steak, right? That refers to the grain offering at the morning sacrifice back in the temple in Jerusalem.
Exactly. At about 9 a.m., the priests in Jerusalem were slaughtering the lamb and offering the grain on the altar. At that precise moment, hundreds of miles away in a desert, the water arrived.
It connects the miracle to the covenant.
It does. It reminds us that God isn't just a random cosmic force. He acts in accordance with his sacrificial system. The power for the miracle flows from the altar. It's a beautiful link.
And the water comes. The text says it came by the way of Edom.
Geographically, this makes perfect sense. There was likely a heavy storm high up in the mountains of Edom, maybe 50 or 60 miles away. The soldiers in the valley didn't see the clouds or feel the rain, but the runoff traveled down the wadis, the dry riverbeds, and suddenly a flash flood fills the valley and all the ditches they had just dug.
It's a supernatural timing of a natural event. But here's where the story gets really cinematic. The water arrives, but it creates a bizarre optical illusion for the enemy.
Yes. The Moabites have mobilized their entire army. The text says they gathered all that were able to put on armor and upward. So from teenagers to old men, they are standing on the high ground at their border, looking down into the valley where the Allied armies are camped.
And the sun is rising.
The sun is rising, the red morning sun, and it's shining on this fresh water that is pooling in the ditches, which are dug into the famously red soil of Edom.
And to the Moabites, it doesn't look like water.
It looks like blood, verse 22. And they rose up early in the morning, and the sun shone upon the water, and the Moabites saw the water on the other side as red as blood.
Why would they immediately assume it's blood? That seems like a massive leap.
It's confirmation bias. They know the coalition is shaky. They know Israel and Judah and Edom don't really get along. They know the history of betrayal and infighting in the region. So their immediate assumption was that the alliance had fractured during the night and the kings had turned on each other, which was very common in ancient warfare.
They saw what they expected to see?
They saw what they wanted to see. Their conclusion in verse 23 is, this is blood. The kings are surely slain, and they have smitten one another.
So their greed takes over. They don't send scouts. They don't organize a battle formation. They just shout, now therefore Moab to the spoil. They think they are running down to loot dead bodies and abandoned equipment.
This is such a profound spiritual warfare point. God used the enemy's own greed and presumption against them. What looked like blood, a sign of death to the enemy, was actually water, a sign of life to God's people. It's a complete inversion of reality based on perspective. The very thing that saved Israel became the bait that destroyed Moab.
So the Moabites rush in, totally disorganized, expecting no resistance, probably with their swords sheathed, ready to grab gold and armor, and then Surprise.
The trap springs.
Yeah.
The Israelites, who are very much alive and hydrated, rise up from the dead from their ambush positions, and it's a complete slaughter. The Moabites are caught completely off guard and routed. They turn and run, but the Israelites pursue them into their own land.
And they fulfill the prophecy.
They fulfill it to the letter. They devastate the land. They clog the wells with stones. They cut down the good trees. They tear down the cities. It's total destruction.
They push Mesha, the king of Moab, all the way back to his capital city, Kir-Hareseth. He is holed up in his last fortress. The coalition has him surrounded. The text says slingers are attacking the walls. He is watching his entire kingdom burn to the ground.
He is absolutely desperate. Verse 26 tells us he tries one last military gambit. A breakout. He gathers 700 swordsmen, his elite guard, his personal warriors, and tries to punch a hole through the siege lines.
And the text says he specifically targets the king of Edom's position. Why Edom?
It's a smart strategic move. Edom was the weak link. They were the reluctant ally, the vassal state. Mesha probably thought, the Edomites have the least skin in this game. If I hit them hard enough, their line will break and they'll run, and I can escape into the desert.
But it fails.
It fails. The line holds. He's pushed back into the city. He has no moves left. It's checkmate.
And this brings us to the moment that stopped me in my tracks when I first read it. Verse 27, the most disturbing verse in the entire chapter, and maybe one of the most in the whole Bible.
Mesha realizes there is no military way out. So he turns to the theological nuclear option of his pagan worldview. He takes his eldest son, the heir to the throne, the crown prince, the boy who would have been the next king, and brings him up to the top of the city wall.
In full view of the Israelite army, in full view of his own starving people.
Yes. Then he took his eldest son that should have reigned in his stead and offered him for a burnt offering upon the wall. He sacrifices his own child to his god, Chemosh.
Just the sheer horror of that image. The smoke rising, the presumed screams. Why? What is the theological logic, if you can even call it that, behind such an act?
We have to try to get inside the Moabite worldview. Their relationship with their gods, like Chemosh, was purely transactional. The phrase is, "Duode, I give, so that you will give." Mesha believed that Chemosh was angry with him. That's why he was losing the war so badly.
So he had to appease him.
He had to do something so extreme, so costly, that it would force Chemosh's hand. He had to offer the most valuable thing he possessed. Not a sheep, not a bull, his future, his lineage, his own son. It was the ultimate act of desperate, manipulative worship.
And here's the part that confuses everyone. The text says, and there was great indignation against Israel, and they departed from him and returned to their own land.
Great indignation. The Hebrew word there is ketzef. It's a powerful word that almost always refers to divine wrath.
Wait, so he sacrificed his child? And it worked. The siege broke. The Israelites just packed up and left.
Yes. The victory, which was moments from completion, was aborted. They packed up their tents and went home.
That feels incredibly unsatisfying. It feels like the bad guy won by doing the most evil thing imaginable. How do we interpret this indignation? Who was indignant?
This is one of the most debated verses in Old Testament scholarship. There are three main theories, and none of them are particularly comfortable.
Okay, let's go through them. Option A.
Option A is that the indignation was divine wrath from Yahweh, God's wrath. The idea here is that God was angry at Israel. Why? Well, perhaps because they had pushed the siege too far, crossing a line into a level of cruelty that provoked this horrific act. Or perhaps by witnessing this abomination and being the direct cause of it, they incurred a level of blood guilt. The land was now polluted by this ultimate pagan sacrifice, and God's holy presence could no longer abide there with his army.
So God essentially said, this has gone too far. The mission is over. Get out of there.
Essentially. Elisha had promised them victory over Moab, which they had already achieved. The country was destroyed, the army was crushed. But he didn't necessarily promise they would capture the king or take the capital. The main objective was accomplished, but the spiritual cost of finishing the job became too high.
Okay, that makes some sense. What's option B?
Option B is that the indignation was psychological or moral horror. The Ketzef wasn't from God, but a feeling of intense revulsion from the coalition armies themselves. Imagine being an Israelite soldier. You've been fighting for weeks, you're exhausted, and suddenly you are forced to watch a father burn his son alive on the city wall.
It would be profoundly traumatizing.
It would be sickening. It broke their spirit. It was a wave of moral revulsion that just swept through the camp, a feeling of, this isn't worth it. We're not fighting flesh and blood anymore. This is pure madness. We've won enough. Let's just go home. The sheer horror of the act effectively ended the war because nobody had the stomach to keep fighting.
That feels very human. I can definitely see that happening. But what about the third option? You mentioned spiritual warfare.
Option C is the most controversial, but it fits the ancient worldview very well. Some scholars suggest that in the Old Testament context, this sacrifice actually released a real, tangible demonic power.
So not that Chemosh is a real god equal to Yahweh.
No, not at all. Elisha already proved Yahweh controls nature. But the Bible is clear that there are spiritual entities, demons behind idols. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God.
So the sacrifice unleashed something into the spiritual atmosphere.
That's the theory. That this act of supreme human evil supercharged the demonic realm and released a spiritual darkness or a oppressive heaviness, a demonic backlash that physically and psychologically repelled the Israelite army. And remember, the Israelites were spiritually compromised. They had Jehoram, the idolater, leading them. They were unequally yoked. They didn't have the spiritual authority or armor to stand against that level of unleashed darkness.
That is a terrifying thought. It's like a horror movie where the villain completes the ritual and summons a demon and the heroes just have to run.
Whichever interpretation you land on, the result is the same deeply ambiguous ending. The military objective was mostly achieved. Moab was devastated. The rebellion was crushed. But the campaign ends on this hollow, traumatic note. It's an incomplete victory.
It feels like the spiritual compromise of the alliance Jehoshaphat yoking himself to Jehoram eventually caught up with them. They could handle the desert, they could handle the Moabite army, but they couldn't handle the ultimate confrontation with darkness because their own foundation was cracked.
Precisely. Jehoram's idolatry and Jehoshaphat's compromise left a spiritual door open. They got the water, they got the route, but they couldn't close the deal when the real spiritual battle manifested.
Wow. Okay, let's take a breath there. That is a heavy ending. But we need to pivot now. We need to apply this. Because despite the horror and the ambiguity, there's so much rich symbolism and application here for us today.
There is an incredible amount. Let's look at the typology first. For Christians reading this story through the lens of the whole Bible, it just screams of the gospel in so many ways.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, the water is a clear type of the Holy Spirit.
How so?
Think about how it came, without wind and rain. It wasn't about sensationalism. It wasn't about the thunder and the lightning and the big show. It flows quietly into the low places, into the ditches that have been dug. The Holy Spirit fills the humble, prepared heart. He comes to fill our emptiness.
And Elisha, who does he represent?
Elisha is a beautiful type of Christ. He's the mediator. The three kings represent all of humanity, sinful, desperate, dying in a desert of our own making. We can't save ourselves. We have to go to the mediator, and it's only his word that can bring the life-giving water. Without the prophet, without the mediator, the kings die in the desert, period.
And the valley itself.
The valley is the world. It's the dry seasons of our lives. It's depression, it's bankruptcy, it's waiting for a diagnosis, it's grief. We all, at some point, walk through the wilderness of Edom.
Let's talk about that modern application. The ditch digging. You mentioned this in the very beginning as the big takeaway.
This, for me, is the take-home lesson of the entire chapter. Faith is digging before the rain. In our modern lives, we so often treat God like a cosmic magician. We sit back and we say, God, give me a job. God, fix my marriage. God, grow my business. But we sit on our hands.
We wait for the rain clouds to show up before we even think about buying an umbrella.
Right. But Elisha's command was dig. Writing that business plan when you have no funding is digging a ditch. Updating your resume and sending it out when no one is hiring is digging a ditch. Going to marriage counseling when you don't feel like it and there's no visible progress is digging a ditch. You are creating the capacity for God to fill.
That's huge. It shifts the responsibility back to us. It's not passive waiting. It's active preparation. God provides the water, but I have to provide the trench.
Exactly. If you pray for rain but you don't prepare the field, you're just going to have a mudslide. You need the ditches to hold and contain the blessing. And notice, digging is hard work. It's sweating. It's getting blisters. It's boring. Faith often looks like boring, hard work in the dark, just trusting that the water is coming.
I love that. What about the unequal yoke aspect? Jehoshaphat's big mistake.
This is a massive warning for every business owner, every church leader, every family. Jehoshaphat suffered because he aligned himself with Jehoram. He almost died in the desert because of Jehoram's lack of planning and his unbelief.
So be careful who you partner with.
Extremely careful. If you enter a business partnership with someone who has a Jehoram spirit, someone who is unethical or who panics under pressure or who blames everyone else for their problems, you are going to suffer for their mistakes. Bad alliances will drag you into deserts you were never meant to walk in.
You might find yourself digging ditches, not for your own trial, but because you tied yourself to someone else's drama.
That's a word for somebody listening right now. Check your contracts. Check your circle. Who are you yoked to?
And for the culture at large, what's the lesson?
It shows the fragility of purely political or military solutions. Jehoram thought his coalition was strong. Look at us, 3 kings, 3 armies. But the moment the water ran out, the coalition started to crumble. And the moment the spiritual horror happened on the wall, the coalition completely dissolved. Military might is useless without spiritual sustenance and moral integrity.
Let's move to our final section then. Encouragement and spiritual warfare. Because despite the dark ending, there is real, tangible encouragement here for the believer.
There is so much. First, God is not limited by your logistics. He provided water in a way that defied meteorology. He can provide for you in ways that defy your bank account, your resume, or the current state of the economy. This is a light thing in the sight of the Lord.
I need to write that on a sticky note and put it on my mirror. This is a light thing. The problem that is keeping me up at night, that feels like a mountain, is a light thing for God.
It is. He doesn't struggle to help you. The second encouragement is that salt and light principle we talked about.
The Jehoshaphat effect.
Yes. If you are a believer in a secular or even hostile environment, take heart. You might feel alone. You might feel like the odd one out. But God may be sustaining your entire company or your entire department just to preserve you. You are the Jehoshaphat in the room. Your presence brings a covering of grace.
And finally, let's talk about behavioral renewal. What should we do differently after reading and understanding this chapter?
I think there are 2 major things. First, we need to intentionally shift from blame to inquiry. Don't be a Jehoram. When the crisis hits, don't immediately scream, "Why is God doing this to me?" Be a Jehoshaphat. Pause and ask, is there a word from the Lord? What is the instruction here?
Stop complaining and start inquiring. And the second,
use worship as a weapon. This is practical spiritual warfare. When you are stressed, angry, or surrounded by the noise of Jehorams in your life, put on the music. Reset the atmosphere. Elisha couldn't prophesy until the minstrel played. We often can't hear God's quiet voice until we intentionally quiet the noise of our own anxiety with worship. It tunes your spiritual frequency.
this has been an absolutely incredible journey. I mean, we went from the boardroom politics of the divided kingdom to a desperate death march in the desert, to a miracle of physics, to a bloody illusion, a slaughter, and finally to a deeply unsettling theological mystery.
It really is a microcosm of the spiritual life, isn't it? The drought, the digging, the miraculous water, and the intense warfare. It's all there in one chapter.
It is. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with that final, powerful visual. The ditches.
The ditches.
I want you to visualize that valley. It's hot, it's silent, the sun is beating down, your hands are blistered from the shovel, you are exhausted beyond belief, and a cranky old prophet is telling you to just keep digging holes in the rock.
It's illogical, it hurts, it feels pointless.
It does. But that is where the miracle lives. The water only flows into the places you have intentionally hollowed out.
Yeah.
So, my question to you listening right now is this: where is the dry valley in your life? And more importantly, are you just standing there complaining about the drought, or are you grabbing a shovel?
Dig the ditch.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into 2 Kings 3. We'll see you next time.